story about how we got the cat before this one, and I don't want to do that again. Go
Okay,
through
now
that again.
we have begun recording the session, and I just want to welcome everybody to this is once again the Legacy for Life Houston Humane Lecture webinar series, excuse me. And we got a great speaker today. We've got local attorney Jean Tausk, who is an
Yes,
expert in many things and speaks Russian well,
I'll forward it to you.
huge background. You can read all about his bio online. He's going to tell us all about ways to protect yourself from online crime, cyber threats, fraud, identity theft. And if you have specific questions, type them in the chat. But before we go to Gene, we're going to hear a little bit from our Director of Development at Houston Humane Society, from Debbie Ortiz. So, Debbie, I will pull up some slides and you can tell everybody about the Legacy for Life and the Houston Humane Society.
Chris, I appreciate it, but someone is asking me for the link. Could you go ahead and take the first couple and let me send this to her real quick?
Oh, absolutely. So let me just go ahead and share here.
Giving a
Uh,
speech. Yeah, I'll call you back. Thank you.
there we go. So this is once again our Legacy for Life Fall Speaker Series, and we've had a number of good sessions this fall from pet trusts and also ways to save money on taxes while supporting your favorite local charities like Houston Humane Society. A little bit about the Houston Humane Society. We were founded in 1958. And we see all kinds of pets here. What you're probably most familiar with is the adoption of pets, but we do vaccination and we do spay and neuter surgeries, and we do a whole lot more. We also see all kinds of animals. So we see bunnies, we see reptiles, we even see some other small mammals like coyotes and all kinds of things that come into our shelter. Birds. So we've got our experts in the exotic pet veterinary care as well. And anyway, there's a lot of great services that the Houston Humane Society provides to the community if you weren't aware of those things. I'm going to advance here and a little bit about our Legacy for Life.
Thanks, Chris. I'm back. I can talk.
Oh,
I
fantastic.
wanted to be sure that she could join us. I do see that we have one of our rabbit volunteers on. So thank you, Diana, for joining us, and the rest of you who I haven't met yet. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Legacy of Life, which is a donor club that we have that's for supporters who will put us into their bequest. And also, you can join our Guardian Angels program, which is if you do put us in your will and you wish for us to care for your pet, we are happy to do so. And there's paperwork that I could provide. If anyone's interested, just put your name in the chat or your email, and I can send that to you. Basically, you tell us about your pet, a dog, cat, horse, whatever, and we make provisions if you don't have anyone who can care for your pet. And that was the topic of our first series, which I know we do have recordings of all of our programs. So if you'd also like to get any of those, please put your name and or email in the chat, and we will be sure to send those to you. And I think we are ready to get going.
And before we go to Gene, I will remind you all you can type questions in the chat as we go. I'll be gently interrupting Gene to pose those questions if he doesn't catch them. And I will also ask you if you could, we're just asking everyone to type into the chat your name and what pets you have in your household. And so, Gene, before we get started, what pets do you have in your household?
I was explaining before we were recording. We have a dog named Syra. She is a Pomeranian, a breed I never knew existed until we adopted her, and just really, really great dog. And we have two cats. Once again, as I was saying before we got on, it's always been fate of my wife and I to have two cats. It started actually when we were in the State Department and we moved to Moscow. I wanted to adopt a cat, and we adopted one, and then suddenly another one was more or less given to us. So it's always had two cats. I don't know their breeds. One is the one cat we have is about 12 years old, and I just don't really see her. She hides behind the couch when the dog is out. And the other one is a very beautiful black cat who we just adopted about 2 months ago. Once again, she was a street adoption, and she is just so wonderful.
Thank you, Jean. We appreciate you sharing. And we do have some wildlife people on too who aren't into domestics. And of course, we're all about all animals. So we're very excited to have you here, and we are looking forward to hearing you tell us how we can protect ourselves.
Well, thank you. I've just for the wildlife people, I have tried to adopt a parrot, but my wife's words, I'm not going to have an involved creepy dinosaur in our house. So I do, for the parrot people there, I do love parrots, but unfortunately, it's just not meant to be it. Um, so thank you very much for having me. Hopefully, this will be informative and a little bit entertaining. And as you were saying, if you have any questions, you can. I'm on the chat here, but I don't know how it works. But please feel free to ask. And if I'm talking too fast or if you miss something, please let me know.
Gene,
Oh,
I am going to ask all of our guests to please mute themselves while we speak so that we can hear you clearly without interruption. And if
okay,
they do have questions, to type it into the chat. Thanks so
fair
much.
enough. Fair enough. Um, I guess I should start off with the basics. What is fraud? Um, my first day of criminal defense and or criminal law in law school, our professor asked us that, and brilliant students that we were, somebody came up with the answer, well, fraud is bad. I guess I have a hard time arguing with that. Um, at its basic level, fraud is the use of deception to basically take something from another person. And when I say deception, the example I always give is that if I'm walking down the street and somebody approaches me and pulls out a gun and points it at me and says, the proverbial your money or your life, and I turn over my money, well, that's clearly, armed robbery. I'm being threatened through the use of force or physical violence to do something. And the obvious connotation is that if I don't cooperate, something bad will happen to me. And those sort of things have been going on since the dawn of time, of course. Um, Fraud, on the other hand, is the use of deception, the use of playing on people's insecurities and fears, psychological manipulation to get something from that other person. And I've given quite a few speeches in my time, and I always have to put this with this confession, if you want to call it that. I actually have sort of been written for confidence men, or the reason is that really good fraudsters, the ones that get away with it for some period of time, have really a lot of innate self-confidence, and you need to. That's where we get the word con man from, by the way, confidence man. The idea being is that the victim, the target of a con, will and basically be able to be impressed by the person pulling off the scam, and as a result, will feel confidence in turning his or her money over to them. And most of us, including myself, don't have that kind of confidence or self-belief where you can pull this sort of thing off. But fraudsters and con men obviously do. That's how they make a living. Um, and one of the things I always like to mention to people who are, when I discuss fraud is, first of all, fraud affects everybody. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how dumb you are. I don't care what position you are in life. I don't care if you're the president of a corporation. I don't care if you're a street beggar. Fraud affects everyone. And I mean, let me give two perfect examples. This is Houston. The older I get, the more people don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to imagine everybody here understands the term Enron. Enron at one point was the seventh largest company in America. I just consider that for a minute, the seventh largest company in America. And when I was a young attorney, I was an associate attorney at a large law firm that worked across the street from Enron. We were at 1400 Smith, they were at 1200, and they always used to have parties in the park between our two buildings. And I remember myself and the other associates would just look at the parties going on. We're like, man, did we pick the wrong job? These guys are having all the fun, they're making all the money, and sure enough, the whole thing was a con job. It wasn't even a con job in the sense that it was a good con job. It was basically what we call a pyramid scheme. And that's the most common type of fraud there is, large scale fraud. So it wasn't even something inventive. And it's one of those things where you look back on and you say, how did we miss this? I mean, I'm a Star Wars nerd myself. And so I look at the companies that Jeffrey Skilling formed to try and hide the debts of Enron. And they had company names like, Jedi, Chuco. I mean, come on, man. So it's imagine that. I mean, the best people in America and the world for that matter, the most sophisticated financial analysts, all were fooled, for the most part, were fooled by Enron. So I'm saying anybody can be a victim of fraud. Another example I like to give is It's Health South, which was another large scale fraud, and people get fooled all the time. Um, it just happens. It's who we are as human beings. It's built into our evolutionary psychology, and so when I talk about fraud, the first thing I want to get across to everybody is, look, you can be a victim of fraud, and it doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're naive. It happens to everyone. And I gave a lecture last week where I talked about this, but I'll discuss it briefly again. One of the people I admired was this guy named James Randi. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, probably not, but James Randi was a magician who lived a good long life. From 1927 until about 2021, and he was what we used to call an escape artist. He like his idol Harry Houdini, he would get himself tied up, thrown into safes, thrown into water, and he would escape. And he was very good at it, but toward I shouldn't say later, in his 30s and 40s, he began to focus on what he called his other career, which eventually became his dominant career, and that was exposing what he called fake psychics. And I don't want to get into, the whether or not psychic power exists or not. That's not the point of this. But what I want to point out is that there were people who were fooled by what Randy called basic magician's tricks. And these are people who were intelligent people. As a matter of fact, Stanford University. Yes, the Stanford University over in California. Look, I went to Ohio State, so I'm not really impressed by Stanford anyway. But a lot of people are, at Stanford, wow, one of the best universities in the world. They actually had a lab that was fooled by two people who basically were using magician's tricks to show they had psychic powers, and they were fooled by them. So just not to repeat myself, but anybody can be fooled by fraud. Anybody can be a victim of fraud. And what I'm trying to say is, please, if you're ever a victim of fraud, don't feel bad about yourself. Don't kick yourself. Don't say, "Oh God, how can I be so dumb?" or things like that. We're all human beings, and the whole point of a fraudster is to know how to exploit psychological weaknesses. And it's not something you can really learn. Well, let me rephrase that. They don't really teach it in colleges and universities, but people pick this stuff up and they're very good at it. So, what I'm going to do today is talk about 7 ways in which you can hopefully avoid internet fraud. By virtue of the fact here, I'm sitting in my office in the Heights, and everybody is watching me, just shows how prevalent the internet is in our society. And there's there's a very short-lived TV show about lawyers in the future, and I don't watch shows about the law because compared to the real thing, they're kind of boring. But this one is kind of intriguing, and like I said, it was only on for like 3 or 4 episodes, but in the future, and by 2050, I think is when it took place, the courtroom didn't exist. It was all by holograms. So you'd sit in your office, appear by hologram in the courtroom, and the judge was a hologram, your opponent was a hologram. And I started wondering, well, how soon will that happen? Well, during the COVID shutdown, we had trials online. So, it's an example of reality catching up with art. So, the internet it's not going anywhere. It's only going to get more pervasive in our society. And as a result, a lot of fraud scams that used to take place in what we call the real world now take place in the digital world. And for fraudsters, the internet is just a amazing gift to them because there's so many ways in which you can disguise yourself and disguise who you are and disguise your company that unless you have a really tech savvy background or are very good at technology, sometimes it's hard to discover it. So it's now up to the point where I read a statistic somewhere where about 65% of all frauds take place online. So if you want to talk about the major threats to how fraudsters and con men work, it's through the internet. And as I said, it's only going to get worse, or it's only going to be more out there simply because this kind of technology and the subsequent improving technology will be such a big part of our lives, and it's impossible to avoid. So let's talk about internet fraud. And for the most part, what's interesting is that a lot of internet fraud, the same way you would expose or protect yourself from fraud, and once again, the real world, is the same way you will expose yourself to. Somebody asked, what was the name of that show? I don't know. The only thing I remember is that Hector Elizondo is one of the stars, and I just like him as an actor. That's the only thing I remember. But if you can find it, anyway. Um, so the same techniques you use to protect yourself from fraud in the real world are pretty much the same techniques you use to protect yourself from fraud in the digital world. So the first thing I want to talk about is the first approach is, and everybody should know this by now, if it sounds too good to be true, probably is, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that is such a basic core fundamental defense against fraud. I can't emphasize it enough. Let's use Enron again as an example. Enron at one point was growing so fast, it was breaking all the records as to company growth. The dividends it was pouring out were amazing. It seemed like something which, you know, just couldn't be stopped. And when asked about how do you guys do this? How are you outpacing IBM? How are you outpacing all these other companies? Well, these other companies they're living in the past. They don't have our 21st, don't forget, this is 2000, our 21st century ways of doing things. We're the future. We find different models and ways to work the world as we see it, not the way the world is. And you listen to this and like, okay, well, sounds like gobbledygook to me, but whatever. You guys are the ones making money. But once again, it sounds too good to be true. And there are a handful of financial advisors who would not invest in Enron. And when asked about it, their response was very easy. They said, "We don't know how they make their money. They publish this stuff. We can't follow it. We don't know what they're saying. And I'm not going to invest my money, much less my client's money, in something I can't understand." And interestingly enough, the way I found out Enron was a fraud, or I should say, the way I first had my suspicions, was my brother. He's a visual effects supervisor and producer in Hollywood. Yes, I'm very proud of him. And Enron was starting today what we call streaming technology, Netflix, Amazon Prime, or what have you. And this is in 2000. And I called my brother up, Jamie. I said, Jamie, this sounds great. Streaming technology. And Jamie, who I love very dearly, by the way, said, "You're an idiot. That technology doesn't exist. What are you talking about?" I said, "Jamie, you can watch stuff online and download movies." He said, "Yeah, 20 years from now." And I was like, "Do you know what you're talking about?" And that I love my brother, but like I said, he got into it with me. Like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Who's the one who's on with the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences? Who's the one that goes to the academies everywhere? Who's the one that works with stars? No, but please tell me more about how you know about the movie business." And sure enough, of course, he was right. And that got me thinking, well, I trust my brother implicitly, and he's telling me this is a bunch of nonsense. And we all know what happened. So once again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Always, please, if you learn nothing else from this, please keep that in the back of your mind. I remember my dad telling me that when I was 7 years old, and it's true. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So that's the first step to protecting yourself from internet fraud. So moving on to the second one, it's the slide up there. It says now, 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 now. Most types of frauds have some type of pressure component to them. Why? Well, sooner or later, most fraudsters, most con men realize at some point the game is going to be up. You've got to get their money. If you've ever been in sales, there's a there's a mantra that they always shout that they always a good salesperson will know. And if you've ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, Alex Baldwin talks about this. And by the way, if you watch it, there's a very profanity-laced movie, but there's a speech that Alec Baldwin gives for about 10 minutes. And one of the things he always says is ABC, always be closing. ABC, always be closing, except his language is a lot more colorful. There's always some kind of pressure component to any type of fraud. They want your money and they want it now. Now, that's not to say that they will not invest the time to develop a relationship with you. Remember what I said, a fraudster, a con man needs to have have the time to exploit your psychological weaknesses. But at some point, they will be telling you, it's time to fish or cut bait. It's time to get involved with this. And if you start to feel uncomfortable, there's ways, of course, they try and work around that. But when there is that pressure component that starts, that's when red flags are supposed to go up. Any kind of investment, unless it's something, that was just like some gold mine that was discovered 2 weeks ago, and you're the only one person that knows about it, which, by the way, is in and of itself problematic. But any kind of investment is generally something that will develop over time. I mean, I've worked with my financial advisor now for 30 plus years, and he's never told me, Gene, I've got a great opportunity for you. It's now or never. And if he did, I'd really start to consider another financial advisor, because the point of the matter is, if something is happening where the money is needed now, then the question is why? What is so special about why you need to invest the money now? And fraudsters, con men being who they are, they will have an explanation for you, and it will be a perfectly reasonable explanation. However, once again, you still need to ask yourself, why do you need the money now? And when that pressure begins to be applied in any type of con relationship, in any kind of fraudster relationship, and it will happen, I promise you, just as the sun is going to rise, it will happen. The question you need to ask yourself is why? Why is this happening now? And this goes to another point. You should always, before you invest in anything, you should talk to a qualified financial advisor. But that's something everybody should be aware of anyway. So always be on the lookout for pressure tactics. And a good con man, a good fraudster is not going to turn up the heat right away. It's going to be like the analogy of the frog boiling in a pot. You put a frog in a pot of water and you slowly turn up the heat and the frog doesn't realize it's getting turned up and then eventually it starts boiling and the frog dies. Well, a fraudster is the same way. They're going to turn up the heat eventually, but at some point that heat is going to reach the point where the water boils and they're going to want their money now. It's generally because they need money coming in. A lot of schemes, by the way, are pyramid schemes. You can look up the term. I'm not going to talk about it today, but pyramid schemes always have to have money coming in, always. And so if they're demanding money, that's something you should be aware of. So the pressure techniques that fraudsters or con men will use, they're out there, and just be aware of them. And as I said, they're not going to turn up the heat right away because they're they're con men. They know when to apply the pressure, but at some point they will. And as I said, I've never had my financial advisor ever tell me you need to invest now. I've sat down with him and he said, okay, what about this? What about that? I think this is a good investment. Here's why. But it's never been you need to invest now. You have to do it. Okay, let's move on to the next one, and we're going to talk about the next few minutes about romance scams. Um, Even by the standards of fraud, romance scams are really, really raw things because it not only exploits a person's financial vulnerabilities, but their emotional ones as well. And a really good fraudster knows how to do this, but with the internet, it's now become 1,000 times easier to do this sort of thing. And a lot of times in groups such as, well, like I've been married so long, I don't even know what dating apps are out there, but whatever dating apps are out there that you use to find people, I promise you, I 100% promise you, there are con men and con women involved in that. As somebody said, I speak Russian, and I was stationed in Moscow for several years with the State Department. And when I came back and became a lawyer and started doing immigration work, that was just when the Russian mail order bride thing was getting started. And it, what's there's a lot of interesting things about that for me, not the least of which is it involves Russia, but also the the people that were getting involved with this thing, the people that were getting scammed by the proverbial Russian mail order bride. I noticed two things. First of all, these were people who generally were on their first, or rather on their later in life, had looking for a second marriage or something like that, and they're easily exploited by young women who obviously, not obviously, but many times were themselves working for somebody else. And second, there was a thing going on at this time where Russia had this mystique about them, and and keep in mind, I'm dating myself here a little bit. This is when the internet was really getting started, so you could get online and get onto, I don't even know if it's still around, like Anastasia.com and see these beautiful Russian women that were waiting for you. And they use taglines like, Russian women are not spoiled by American feminism, blah, blah, blah. And for a lot of people, they found it, of course, a lot of Russian women were very attractive. It was very easy to get involved with this. But at some point, they began to exploit these people's feelings. Here's a good example, and I used this one in a speech I gave last week. There's a client I had when I left the law firm I was talking about earlier and opened my own practice, who had found a Russian mail order or a Russian girlfriend who wanted to come to the States. Great. And he was telling me, yeah, but the problem is she's having problems getting a visa. Okay, well, that's not uncommon, so sure, why not? And long story short, she was looking for what's called a tourist visa. It's the most common type of visa that's used for people who, and as the name implies, a tourist visa for somebody who's coming to the States to be a tourist. And she was saying, yeah, I went to the embassy and, my application was denied and they need another $5,000. And excuse me, $5,000 for a visa? That's news to me. And he sent it to her. And well, it was denied again, and now I need $7,500. And, but anyway, long story short, she used this ladder of escalation to the point he paid about $35,000 for what everybody should realize by now, and not was a non-existent visa. I mean, first of all, the American embassy or any embassies do not charge that kind of rates for a tourist visa. Okay, um, there's handling fees and things like that. And number one, even number one, that was number one. Number two, even if the visa is denied, what sense does it make where, okay, it was denied the first time. Now they've increased the price, so you have to try again. It's price increase, and they denied again, so they've increased the price. And you know, that really didn't happen when I was in the State Department. It hasn't been that long. Let me check and see if they've changed the rules. Nope. So, but what was interesting to me and unfortunately very emotional was, I had to sit down with this guy and said, look, you're being scammed. It's as simple as that. Here's why. And he took it very harshly. He thought I was lying to him. And once again, he was being manipulated by this person. But the reason I put up this tagline here, wasn't the bar last week a lot of fun? I just got a message. Actually, I show that, as William Shatner would say, irony can be pretty ironic sometimes. I got a text message saying, "Hey, remember me from the bar last week, from the restaurant last? Remember me from the restaurant last week on Westheimer? Thank you." Oh, I'm going to answer that one. All right, sure. These random texts, it's called phishing, has been around, but the idea is just like any good sales technique, you put a hook into the person and hopefully you reel them in. So a lot of times these spammers will send out thousands, tens of thousands of messages like this. Wasn't the bar last week a lot of fun or something to that effect? And they're hoping, of course, you answer. And when you answer, of course, eventually you're going to find out, oh, I'm sorry, I must have sent the wrong person. But hey, who are you? And this should be obvious, but unfortunately, once again, you're dealing with people's emotions. When you send out 10,000 texts like this and two people answer and you're able to hook them on for a fraudster or for a scam artist, that's a great result. And because that with computer technology, and don't forget, a lot of these fraudsters are not in the United States, they're in other countries. And if they can hook people along, once this hook works and you begin to be drawn into conversations, eventually, sooner or later, it's going to lead to the, well, can I meet you? Can we talk? And things start to go in a different direction from there. So the second thing I want to alert people to are these random texts that you see on your phone. And it's before it was random emails. Random emails are still out there. Now it's random texts. I'm sure pretty soon we're going to get getting random hologram exchanges. And once again, this is going to date me, but there's an old science fiction movie, Logan's Run, where they used holograms to date people in the world of the future. And I'm sure something like that is coming along as well. So, um, what I would do is obviously just keep an eye out for these things and just erase them. I mean, seriously, just erase them. Go on your way. I have to admit, if I'm bored one day in court and I get these things, I like to drag it out. And, if this person sent a text back, oh no, I remember meeting you. Sure. I was the guy who was 7 foot tall, built like a tank. Remember me? Yeah. And look, these conversations never end well. And if you want to waste your time, okay, fine, but it's a really bad way to waste time. So, number two, just look out for things like this. It's really it's phishing, and the term means you send out a bunch of these random texts. Well, not random, but you send out a bunch of these texts. Even if a very, 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 very small number of people react to them, you can still pull a person in. And by the way, I forgot to put this up there, but this is very true. As Americans, we tend to forget we're living in a first world industrialized nation. And if somebody who's living in a third world nation with an income, say, of $6,000 a year, if they can scam somebody for $1,000, that's a job well done for them. So even though a person may only be scammed for $1,000, $2,000, which still hurts, don't get me wrong, for the person doing the scamming, that's a lot of money. I remember once, look, I shouldn't do this, but once again, full confession. Sometimes I get those scam calls, and we'll talk about this later, where it's an obviously fake call, but I go along with it just because I'm bored and I have nothing better to do with my time. Anyway, what happened was this: I recognized the guy's accent, so I started talking to him in Russian, and it turns out it was from Uzbekistan. And I started yelling at him and screaming at him and say, why do you do this stuff? And he said, how expletive, 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 expletive. You all Americans, you're sitting there in your $1 million mansions. I'm just asking for some money. Okay. So this is how I do my job. So, and he sort of had a point. So the average yearly salary in Uzbekistan is $10,000, and it's an incredibly corrupt country. So For them, many ways, it's a way to make a living. Okay, the
That's the
next
question,
one,
Gene. Is there actually a danger in engaging with those people
there is a
in
danger.
conversation when you
There
know
is a
that?
danger, and I don't have time to get into it, but a lot of these scams, I can't say a lot, but some of these scams eventually will lead to the point where you're invited to go visit this person in this country, foreign country. Now, most of us will say, okay, if we say, okay, I'd like you to meet you in Nigeria, most of us would say, okay, let's think about this a bit. However, let's meet in Italy. Great, let's meet in Italy. Great country. You get there, and there are gangs of organized criminals who operate out of these countries who know the territory, Italian territory. I'm just using Italy as an example, okay? I'm not barking on Italians, but they know the country very well. They know the country's laws. They know what can be done. They know areas of the country where they can take you to, and nobody's going to find you. And that's sometimes the end result of these things, where they scammed you already for so much money, they figured they've got you on the hook. Why not go for broke, get you into this foreign country and either kidnap you or basically use the threat of violence at that point to get more money from your bank account. So yes, there is a danger to it. That's what I'm saying. Don't. I'm sure you grew up your parents telling you the same thing. Don't do as I say, do as I, or don't do as I do as I say. Well, look, don't do as I do here, okay? Just because I'm bored and I don't know what better to do in a courtroom, just ignore them, get rid of them. It's really, plus I do get to hear it from my wife who's like, "Oh, doing this again?" So yeah. Okay, the next one. I came across your profile, and this is a variation on the phishing scheme I just talked about earlier. I came across your profile. I was on LinkedIn, I was on Facebook, I was on whatever. I came across your profile. You look interesting. Now, I put this up here for a very special reason. First of all, we're going to talk about it, but this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that you digital manipulation is to the point where you can be talking to somebody and that's not their actual face, that's not their actual body. I've blacked out my office behind me. That's very simple digital manipulation. And now it's to the point where you have full-fledged AI creations who will interact with you. Just about, I think, a month ago, there was a big uproar in Hollywood because now they have a fully created AI digital actress. And a lot of Hollywood actors and actors are saying if a talent agency signs up this actress, we're not going to work with that talent agency anymore. Now, look, that's coming down the line, okay? And as a matter of fact, there was a movie made several years about this starring Al Pacino called Simone, Sim One. It was about an artificially created AI persona who acted in movies. And that was in what, 99, 2000, I think, when that came out. It's going to happen sooner or later. But anyway, the point for this is that you can be interacting online with somebody who is either not who they seem to be or not even there, an AI created digital personality. And whenever I see things like I came across your profile, now sometimes they have an actual question like I have this question about fraud or I have this question about this or that. Okay, I'm willing to talk about it. But when it just comes out with I came across your profile and you seem interesting, why? There's how many billions of people on the internet, and you came across my profile and I'm interesting. And immediately your guard should go up. And it's easy to be cynical in these sort of situations, but you have to be to a point. It, growing up in my generation, we grew up in a generation where we knew, or let me rephrase that, we suspected that sooner or later there'd be worldwide communications, like once again to date myself, something out of Star Trek where you could get online and see people interactive with you. But we didn't have to deal with it. We just thought, well, it's coming. Well, it's here now. And I don't know of any science fiction writer, and I used to read a lot of science fiction, but even the man who invented today what we call by literature, this kind of technology, William Gibson, with his novels, Mona Lisa Overdrive and Neuromancer, he didn't predict this stuff either. Where now you're interacting with how many people, and I always a question I keep in the back of my mind. I came across your profile, and I find you interesting. Well, the next question is why. If like I said, if you have a question for me about fraud or you have a legal question, things like that, okay, I get that. Now you're specifying why you find me interesting. But you're saying, well, you're from Texas and I've always been interested in Texas. Well, great. I'm originally not from Texas, but there's what, 35 million people in Texas and you find me interesting. Why? Or, oh, you're from Houston. I love Houston. Great. Why aren't you in Houston? Oh, well, I've always dreamed about going to Houston. Well, why are you picking me out of what the 2 or 3 million people live here in Houston? You have to be a little, you just have to examine yourself and ask why are they finding you so interesting? Because once again, phishing scams begin like this. And I can only emphasize this so many times. good fraudster, even though they're not meeting you in person, knows how to manipulate you. And once they have that hook, they have something now to begin that exploitation process. And it's like anything else. Once you start a relationship, whether it's through the internet or something like that, the more you invest in it, the harder it is to extricate yourself from that situation. A good example I always give is, I mean, I used to go to Vegas a lot, and I don't gamble. I used to go there for, really, I had a conference there. I had conferences there. I'm not making that up. So I've noticed though, and I met a lot of people who worked at casinos, and I got to know a lot of security experts there. And I'd always ask them, is it true that gamblers believe they have the luck? I'm like, oh yeah, they believe they're on a run. They're on a run, and then when that run ends, sooner or later ends, as it will, they start to lose money. Well, I just got to get them, got to get the run back. And then they find themselves in the hole. I'm almost there. One more game, it'll do it. One more game, it'll do it. I mean, it's one of the oldest psychological con jobs in the world. It goes back to the gambling that existed, I'm sure, in ancient Egypt. But the point I'm trying to make is this: a little innocuous remark like that, the fraudster expects you to start investing into that relationship because they know the more you invest into that relationship, even if it starts out merely as a curiosity, the harder it will be to extricate yourself in the future. Eventually, sooner or later, you'll have invested enough psychological currency into that where you want to see where it goes. So, whenever you see something like that, you know, I would just strongly encourage you to take a back seat and say, why? Why am I so interesting? And also, it's human nature for all of us, especially attorneys, to be somewhat egotistic. Oh, you find me interesting? So does everybody else. So, really just take a step back and examine yourself. And let me throw this out there as well. It never hurts to have somebody who you can talk to for a reality check. I mean, really good friends. Um, there's a joke about attorney. I mean, there's a lot of jokes about attorneys, but one of the more salient jokes about attorneys is that, attorney is someone who tells you not what you need, what you want to hear, it's what you need to hear. And I think that's very true. But also, a good friend is somebody who will tell you what you need to hear as well. I mean, I hope everybody has the kind of good friend who will tell you to your face using a lot of expletives that you're being an idiot. Okay, that's a good friend. And if you tell somebody, look, I just got this message, hopefully your friend will be good enough to tell you, well, I find you interesting, but I've known you for a while. I've also found you to be a jerk. So why does this person find you to be so interesting? So always have that reality check. Okay, moving on to the next type of scam involving relationships. And, we have a mutual friend. Now, this one I love because in theory, it should be very easy to answer. Who? You know, who's the mutual friend? I mean, it can't be that hard. And what's amazing to me, I've seen a lot of these cases and I've read a lot about them. Oh, my mutual friend, Jim. Okay, Jim who? Yeah, Jim. Oh, yeah, Jim. Jim. Yeah, I remember Jim. What am I missing here? And hopefully everybody should realize this. 99.9% of people on the earth have a last name. So, Jim who? And by the way, is it Jim or is it James? Is it Jimmy? Oh no, we have a mutual friend, Jim. But once again, getting that hook into you where it's like, okay, now I'm committed. I've committed just a little bit by agreeing we have a mutual friend. I only know his first name or her first name, but we have a mutual friend. And by the way, I promise you in America, you'll never hear somebody say, yes, we have a mutual friend. Oh, who's the mutual friend? The mutual friend, the mutual friend, they're not going to follow it. Or you'll never see who's the mutual friend. Bogdan. It's a Russian name. It's also a common Slavic name. Bogdan. What? Unless you're from a Slavic nation or unless you know a Slavic language, nobody has heard of Bogdan, okay? So, but they're counting on that you're going to get hooked with that mutual friend and then take you down the road. And what's interesting here is that the fraudster or the con man is playing upon the idea that people don't want to look foolish. And that's one of the oldest psychological tricks in the book. Nobody wants to look foolish. We have a mutual friend, Jim. Jim who? Jim. Jim. Oh, yeah, Jim. I don't want to look foolish to you. I've never met you. I don't know who you are. I have no idea where you are, but I don't want to look foolish. Fraudsters are counting on that. And of course, once again, the easy way out of this, we have a mutual friend, Jim. Jim who? If you can't give me a last name, goodbye. I mean, it's really that simple. And really avoiding a lot of fraud really is that simple. Just we stop and take a look at it, and you get that, um, you can stop it right away. And that is not what people are counting on, though. They're counting on you to make that initial psychological investment, just like the gambler in Vegas or whatever. All I need is one more play. All I need is one more play to get my luck back. The tide is starting to turn for me. Fate is starting to roll the dice for me. And, I've never heard of a broke casino, or if I have heard about it, it's because somebody's, extorting the money from the casino or stealing the money from the casino. But casinos, that is the basic principle casinos run on. I mean, really, that's all it comes down to. I mean, hopefully you should know the house always
House always
wins.
wins.
Yeah, I mean, that should be a basic message to everybody. So, but they're counting just on that one simple psychological trick. Get the hook in. Okay, the next one. At this point, I want to move to something where you've been involved and you've fallen. Okay, I don't like to use the word fallen. You've gotten to the point now where you're involved in this person. You're involved with this scam, with this individual. You're involved with and they're asking you to send money. Okay. Now, here's another way you can check yourself. Here's another way where you can give yourself a reality check. Where do they want you to send the money to? Now, obviously, there's a lot of things like Zelle, a lot of money transfer things, that sort of thing where these are legit. Obviously, I mean, my business uses Zelle and things like that. But a lot of times, fraudsters do not want you to send money to Zelle and things like that. Why? Well, first of all, Zelle, at least the Zelle I've encountered, has $1,000 a day limit. And the fraudster knows that if you're limited by the amount of money you're going to send them by day, sooner or later you're going to maybe just start to wonder about this. So they have a website or they have some sort of money transfer platform you may have never heard of before, or it sounds odd. Send your money to this website. Well, at that point, you should be asking yourself why. Why are you using this website or this money transfer service I have never heard of? You don't have to be very tech in the world today to use a money transfer site. Everybody uses them, and there are some places in the world you have to use money transfer sites. But why do they want this particular website? Why not? Okay, look, instead of it sending you there, I'll use Zelle. How's that? Oh, no, 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 you can't use Zelle. Why not? Well, I don't have a Zelle account. Okay, well, what about something else? What about I'll send you a credit card? No, 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 you can't do that. Now, this is not a full one. This slide here is not foolproof. It's not 100% accurate all the time, but you'd be amazed how many times a fraudster wants you to send the money to a particular website. And there's another reason as well. Two things certain in life, death, and taxes. No matter what country you're in, you're going to have to pay taxes. They're trying to avoid taxes. It's hard to believe, but fraudsters want to avoid taxes as well. They have these systems set up so that their governments are not monitoring them so they can avoid taxes. So sometimes they have very practical reasons as well. So whenever you're being asked to send money through a website or through a cash transfer system you have never heard of, alarm bells should start going off in your head. And by the way, the reason a lot of times fraudsters don't like wire transfers is because once again they're monitored by governments. Or let's say, here's my wire transfer information. It's going to Nigeria. Most of us at that point would say, okay, hold on a second. Or here's my wire transfer information. It's going to Belarus. Yeah, okay, sure. So it's very important for fraudsters to use wire transfers or use money transfers that can't be traced and go directly to them or go through a party they're sending the money to. So even if you're caught going down the rabbit hole of some of these scams, at some point, the other reason I mentioned it, at some point another red flag will come up where you can say, wait a minute, why am I being asked to send money to this site? And it's a red flag. And at that point, you should really begin to investigate it. Also, keep in mind as well, any transfer $10,000 or more has to be reported to the IRS, which is why I've never seen, except with really, really, really sophisticated fraud schemes, but I've never seen a fraud scheme where the initial money being asked that they're sending you is over 10,000. Why? Because at some point, if you start talking to any financial advisor, said, yeah, I sent $11,000 to this person last night. Well, you did fill out this form, right? What do you mean what form? The IRS form, because otherwise that's tax fraud. So they know American law sometimes better than some lawyers do. So they'll keep it under certain numbers. Another thing to keep in mind as well is what we call pyramid money building, where they won't ask for $10,000, but they'll ask for some weird number like $7,999. Why is that? To avoid reporting requirements. Each country has different reporting requirements. For example, I think it's Liechtenstein. Anything over $50, the equivalent of $50, you have to report. There's a reason for it. Okay. And finally, the sixth slide, and I put this in here because this is one of the things that should be so incredibly obvious, but it's not. You get a phone call from somebody. Hi, I'm from the Internal Revenue Services. I'm here to tell you that unless you pay us the $100,000 you owe us, the Internal Revenue Services, you will be under the arrest. Yeah. Now, it's no secret that a lot of fraudsters come from countries where English is spoken by a vast majority of the population, but it's spoken in a different way. Whenever you hear somebody on the other side of on the end of the phone saying something like, "I'm from the Internal Revenue Services," come on, that should be a dead giveaway right there. I mean, there's certain idioms and expressions we have in American English that don't exist in other countries. Here's a perfect example, by the way, for people that have been to Britain. What is a tube? What's the tube? Shouldn't have been there. It's a subway. What's a lift? It's an elevator. And Winston Churchill made the joke that Americans and British are two people separated by the different languages. And of course, he has a point. No matter how well you study English as a foreign language, if it's not your native language and you haven't lived here for a great deal of time, there's certain idioms that will give you away. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. Like I said, the Internal Revenue Services. Variants of English that are spoken in the Indian subcontinent, they automatically put that S into things that we don't normally do. Sometimes it's things that will give it away. I need to go to, my son was sick last night. He went to hospital. If you're an American, it's like, you mean you went to which hospital? You mean a hospital, right? And of course, my British friends are like, hey, buddy, we're the ones that invented the language, all right? If we say he went to hospital, it means he went to hospital. It's these stupid Yanks that have, changed the language around. But that's a dead giveaway. The person's not a native English speaker. Certain things as well, such as even in American, we have idioms as well. I mean, I grew up in Ohio, and for us, a can of Coke was a pop. You want a pop? Can of Pepsi was a pop. I moved down here, and I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a soda. So even in America, which is a large country, of course, we have these idioms. But when you're talking about people who are trying to perpetrate a scam on you from foreign countries, even if their English is excellent, there's things that will give them away. My father, who came from the former Soviet Union, he liked to brag that he spoke the king's English, whatever. But to the end of his dying day, he had a very thick accent, which he could never overcome. But even more importantly, even though he spoke English on a daily basis for over 50 years, there's things he mispronounced. Like, for example, the movie Alien. I said, Dad, you want to go see the movie Alien with me? He looked at it and said, what, a lion? For him, I mean, and keep in mind, he was a brilliant man, but there are certain idioms he never picked up. And just be on the lookout for people that are speaking English in a very unusual manner. Sometimes their grammar may be better than yours. Sometimes their vocabulary may be better than yours. They're not dumb people. However, it's very hard to overcome. It's very hard to overcome cultural linguistic differences. I don't care how good you are. I had a trial about a year or 2 years ago in Beaumont, and the person, one of the witnesses, was bragging about his nickname, which was Asukar. And then the government said, "Well, you have another name, right?" Yeah. If you're a Russian speaker, I apologize for the profanity, but yeah, my nickname is Suka. Well, I just started laughing, and you'd never laugh in a federal court, especially before a judge. And the judge was rightly ticked off and said, "Mr. Tausk, do we have a problem here?" I'm sorry. That word just means something in Russian, different in Russian than it does in the language in English. And well, what does it mean, Mr. Tausk? Well, Judge, you open the door. It's the pejorative term for a female dog. So, Jerry thought it was funny anyway. But the point I'm trying to make is this. I don't care how good you are, linguistic differences can give you away. Okay, two more things, and I promised seven, but this tags on to the first one I had up, which was, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. These are the three rules I live by. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. The second one is the lesson of a chessboard. One of my elementary school teachers, who I dearly love, she was a really good teacher. She taught us a lesson. I think it was in fifth grade or sixth grade. I can't remember. But she taught us a lesson one day about exponential money growth. And she said, okay, Would you kids rather have $10,000 up front, or we take a penny, we put the penny on one of the squares of a chessboard, the next square over, it multiplies, it increases by 100%, so now it's 2. Next square it increases to 4, square after that 8, square after that 16, square after that 32, until you get all the way down and you can have whatever's there. And being dumb kids over $10,000. Well, what she went to show us was that by the time you reach that last square on the chessboard, that's more money than the entire US Treasury because of the exponential effect of money growth by doubling it every square. And a chessboard has 64 squares. By the way, although I love my teacher, she wasn't the one that thought of that. Actually, there's some Persian philosopher who used it to fool one of the rulers of this country. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is this, using Enron as an example because it's such an easy example. If you have a company that's paying out 100% returns every quarter, something is up, okay? I mean, yeah, you can have a streak of luck just like a gambler can, but if you're going to tell me over the years this company is constantly doubling its earnings every set period of time, like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, my skepticism meter goes off the charts. That is impossible. That is just not possible. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of money. So I always keep in the back of my mind that just remember the parable of the chessboard. And finally, the last one, which I talk about, is this. You have 2 minutes. I'm sorry, I thought you're telling me I have 2 minutes, but that's what I was going to say. 2 minutes means one of my good friends is an investment advisor and a venture capitalist. And, of course, I want to listen to him as to how he makes his money, of course. But he told me something interesting, which I've never forgotten. He said, Gene, when a person comes to me with a proposal as to what he wants me to invest my money in and my client's money, I always tell him the same thing. You have 2 minutes to tell me what you're doing. You have 2 minutes to tell me what your investment idea is. And said, I stopwatch. Well, that's going to date me once again. I have my phone with a stopwatch on it. You have 2 minutes. Go. And he says, if by 2 minutes and 1 second they haven't stopped talking, I tell them to leave my office. He says, I don't care what you're trying to sell me. I don't care what kind of investment you have. I don't care what idea you have. If you can't explain it to me in 2 minutes or less, I'm not interested. And the more I thought about it, I said, that really makes a lot of sense. And as a lawyer, I use that myself a lot of times when I'm talking to a jury. If you're talking about something, there was a very famous attorney, can't remember his name, but he did the same thing when he was talking about how his clients got sick working at a nuclear plant. And he was able to condense how a nuclear reactor worked into 2 minutes or less. And by the way, if you've seen the miniseries Chernobyl, they do the same thing there. One of the Soviet elite tells one of the scientists, "Tell me how a nuclear reactor works." And the scientist says, "Well, it's complicated." And he says, "Oh, so you think I'm stupid? Let me tell you. Let me give you another. Let me put it another way. Tell me how a nuclear reactor works, or I'm going to throw you out of the helicopter." Oh, no problem. And in 2 minutes or less, he was able to show how a nuclear reactor worked. I don't care what you're trying to describe. If you can't describe it in 2 minutes or less, there's a problem. And that's how fraudsters are. A lot of times, fraudsters and con men have this great idea, and you listen to them, and they go on and on and on and on. That to me is a red flag. I don't care what. If you're just saying, I've found a gold mine, I'm opening up a gold mine, or I found this new technology, let me tell you about it. You have 2 minutes or less. And, I asked my friend, have you lost out on good investment opportunities? And he said, maybe I have, but I've never regretted it. I've never regretted having that rule of thumb at my disposal. And so that's what since that time, I've adopted that strategy as well. So the 3 ways I've learned to keep a lookout for fraudsters and things that I just set off my alarms are these. Number one, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Number two, the parable of the chessboard. If you have an investment which says it's going to double every 3 months, every 3 months, every 3 months, sooner or later you're going to run out of money. I don't care what country you're talking about. Even if the printing presses go on all night, you're going to run out of money. It's just not physically or economically possible to do that. So if you're showing me an investment that is constantly multiplied on a straight line over a period of time, I'm really, really skeptical. And finally, once again, if you can't tell me what your investment is, what your great money making idea is, and is in 2 minutes or less, I'm not interested. Because if a Soviet scientist, threat of being thrown out of a helicopter, can describe how a nuclear reactor works in 2 minutes or less, you can tell me your great idea for making money in 2 minutes or less. And if you can't do it, I'm not interested.
Wow.
Those are the 7+2 ways I've found to keep alert for internet fraud. Just to wrap things up, as I said, technology is only going to become more and more a part of our life. You can't avoid it. I mean, I suppose maybe if you want to go off grid and live in the mountains somewhere, that's your business. But for the rest of us, it's part of who we are. You simply cannot function in today's world without technology, and it's only going to this technology, as I said, is only going to increase as to how it affects our lives. And so, right now, at the beginning, I said about 65% of all fraud was done online. I expect that number to get to 90% probably in the next 15 years. Whenever you're online, just please keep this in mind. You're always the target for some kind of fraudster, always. And they're always looking at you digitally one way or another. So whenever things pop up, just remember these warning signs that are on the way, because every time I've talked to victims of fraud, they've all told me the same thing. When should I have noticed that? And of course, it's easy to say, well, at the beginning, but it's when you create a timeline, and creating a timeline is a very effective way. I found as a lawyer for criminal defense, but for other things as well. When you create a timeline, there's usually one spot in there which sticks out, and you say, yeah, this is where you should have opened your eyes a little bit. And it's one of these 9 things I've been talking about is to, yeah, this is where things really started to go off the rails. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gene. That was great. And I think those are good lessons for us all. I've been watching the chat and I don't see any questions in the chat, but if you would like to ask a question, now would be the time to unmute and ask that question.
Well, Gene, I just want to tell you, I didn't expect it to be as entertaining.
Thank you.
So thank you for keeping us on the edge of our seats. And I really liked your last point about that we are always being hit up because I think we get kind of complacent and think that nothing's going to happen to us. And, so does anyone have any questions? Have you had any experiences? I know that since I've been here, the reason we came up with this topic, there was a gentleman who had accidentally contributed to us and we didn't have anything to do with it, but someone was using our name and he was very distraught about it. And we helped him go through the process of getting his money back. And we also posted some things on the website to try to help people to be alert to responding to requests. Sandra, do you have a question? I thought, or Diana. Diana, looks like you unmuted.
Just to show that life imitates art. 2 minutes ago, alert, Robinhood Securities Risk Warning. Our automated security check system has detected anomalies in your account, and the number at the top is a Lithuanian number.
Wow.
You know,
Well,
you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
Chris, you want to take it on home?
Well, yeah, I'm just gonna share with everybody real quickly that here at the Humane Society, we offer these webinars every month, and the next webinar will be coming up in November. And we're going to have a presenter from the Greater Houston Community Foundation. He's the Chief Development Officer there, Kevin Pickett. He's going to tell you ways that you can use year-end giving as ways to save money on taxes, using donor advised funds, using distributions from your IRA, basically ways to take money out of what gets paid to the government and instead put it to the favorite charity that you have, like Houston Humane Society. So join us for that one, and it'll be probably the same link. Also, this session was recorded, so you can go back and listen to Gene's advice again later if you'd like.
Thank you
But
so
enjoy it.
much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, and
Take
thank
care.
you all for joining us. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to email either Chris or myself. Take care.
Take care.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.